right, everybody. Welcome to the Prince George's County Public Schools Community Conversation on the Comprehensive School Boundary Initiative. I'm Steve Brigham from Public Engagement Associates. We're part of the consulting team working with the school system on this initiative. Please join me in welcoming Rihanna McCarter, who is the School Boundary Specialist for the Prince George's County School System. Welcome, Rihanna.
Thank you, Steve. Welcome, everyone, and good evening. As Steve said, my name is Rihanna McCarter. I serve as the manager for school boundaries for Prince George's County Public Schools. And I want to thank each of you for taking the time to participate this evening. This is the second phase of a process that began last fall to look at how we can shape boundaries to improve how we utilize schools. In May of this year, we released an interim report with 3 scenarios for boundary adjustments. Now we need your feedback and guidance to help us select one scenario to refine into a final proposal. So your input is critical to moving us forward, and we look forward to hearing from you this evening. Thanks again for joining us, and I will turn it back to Steve.
Great, Rihanna. Thank you. So Rihanna just provided a very high-level overview of what this is all about and why we're here tonight. But I'm going to cover a few things that just gets you even more grounded on tonight's program. But before that, let me just say a little bit about myself. So I've been a resident of Prince George's County for 22 years. My kids have been in the school system. I've got a son in middle school at Kenmore Middle in the Landover area. So this is also a really important process from my own perspective. So it's a real honor to be part of this meeting tonight. So in terms of our goals, we really have 4 goals tonight. So one is giving you deeper background on what this boundary initiative process is, where we are on the timeline, and what the timeline looks like going forward after this part of the public process is over. We're going to describe 3 different scenarios that our consulting team has worked on over the summer and fall, talk a little bit about how they're produced and what the differences are between them, what we kind of weighed more heavily in each one or less heavily. And then we're going to open it up to all of you to move into breakout discussions that will be facilitated by volunteer facilitators who are with us tonight. So that we can hear your perspective and so that the PGCPS team and the consulting team can really get a better understanding of your own reactions and your own priorities to these scenarios as we move this process forward. So next slide. So our agenda, it's pretty simple, but it's going to be a very full agenda. So we'll do a few more process things as part of this opening. We'll do a little bit of polling. And then the final hour or so will be an in-depth presentation, giving you some background, walking you through the scenarios. We'll do some Q&A. So we're going to encourage you to send questions in chat. We're going to introduce you to an online tool that's actually been available for a number of months so that you can see how the different scenarios might impact where you live. Then we'll move into the breakout rooms for about a 20-minute discussion. And then we'll close ourselves out and be out of here around 8 o'clock. And with that, I'm going to turn over the program to Chris Rice, who is with a Director of Planning from WXY, which is the lead consulting group on this project, working very closely with the school system over the last year. So Chris, always great to be working with you. Welcome, and we look forward to hearing what you've got to say.
Thanks so much, Steve. Hello, everyone. My name is Chris Rice. I'm Director of Planning at WXY Studio. We are a planning and urban design firm working with the PGCPS on the Boundary Initiative. And I'm going to start with a brief process overview. So the Boundary Initiative is an effort to best utilize the district's school facilities in support of the district's academic objectives. And Prince George's County Public School System is the 2nd largest system in Maryland and the 25th largest in the United States. On the right is a map of the school district and its schools, and each dot on the map represents a public school in the district. The district has 135,000 students and 207 schools. And it's important to note that in this initiative, we'll focus on neighborhood schools or schools that students residing in Prince George's County are assigned to based on their home address. So this includes 165 schools and 116,000 students. We want to take a moment to reintroduce some key terms that you'll see and hear throughout today's meeting. First, a school boundary is an area that determines which school a home is assigned to, and each home in Prince George's County has an assigned neighborhood school for each education level. Next, what is school utilization? Utilization is the ratio of students enrolled at a school over the school's total capacity, and this measure helps us understand whether a school is operating above capacity or below capacity. And PGCPS aims to keep all schools between 80 and 95% utilized. And why does utilization matter? It's important to note that utilization poses challenge for the district and can impact student experience. Overutilized schools may have over-enrolled classrooms, overcrowded core spaces, the use of portable classrooms or trailers, and other challenges such as lack of parking or crowded bus pickup areas. And on the other hand, underutilized schools may have vacant classrooms, part-time specialty teachers. Underutilization also impacts the district's budget. These schools present a higher cost per student to operate and also receive less funding from the state for capital projects. So PGCPS is experiencing challenges with utilization today, and this is a key reason that the Boundary Initiative is needed. So out of the district's 165 neighborhood schools, only 30% fall in the target utilization range of 80 to 95%. So this means that the majority of schools in the district are either overutilized or underutilized. Currently, around 33% of schools are underutilized and 36% are overutilized. The district has made attempts to address utilization challenges through additional capacity projects. The district currently has 10 planned capacity projects in the pipeline, and most of these are concentrated in the northern and central regions where overutilization is most prevalent. Together, these capacity projects are expected to add over 6,500 student stations to the district in total. The district also plans to open 3 new schools by 2023, highlighted in yellow on the map. This includes 2 new middle schools and a new K-8 school in South County. And consistent with trends of overutilization seen today, most of the planned capital projects and new school construction falls in the north within the Beltway. It's also important to note that over and underutilized schools are not evenly distributed throughout PGCPS. On the right is a map of school utilization and capacity additions, and overutilized schools are represented by orange circles, well utilized by green circles, and underutilized by purple circles. We see that there are more overutilized schools in the North County, especially inside the Beltway. So therefore, we can expect and anticipate more changes to school boundaries in that region. The Boundary Initiative also advances another PGCPS priority, which is shifting all 6th grade students to middle schools. So moving all 6th grade students to middle schools or K-8 schools allows for more specialized instruction, as well as developmental benefits of studying with middle school age peers. So all 3 of the draft scenarios we'll talk through today move all 6th graders to middle schools or K-8 schools. So what are the tools that the district has to address these challenges, and what are some of the potential outcomes of this initiative? So given the challenges presented by over and underutilization, PGCPS's goal is to balance utilization to achieve better functioning schools that work for everyone. So to pursue this goal, some of the tools the district has include school construction and expansion, which we talked about, school consolidation or closing an older school facility and consolidating students to a newer facility, and rezoning students or assigning students to a different school. And so the district is going to use a combination of all 3 of these strategies to create a more balanced system that serves all its students. We also want to acknowledge the ongoing impacts of COVID-19 on the school system. So we recognize that this pandemic continues to affect students and the wider community in Prince George's County. Overutilization and underutilization are still challenges during COVID, and specifically capacity challenges are heightened during COVID as crowded schools are a health concern. So nationally, public school districts saw a drop in enrollment for school year 2021, and this drop has not yet reversed and may be permanent. So PGCPS and other districts were expecting a large school year 21-22 class. However, so far, this is not the case. And the sort of full impact of COVID-19 on PGCPS and school districts nationally remains uncertain. So to recap, this initiative will focus on best utilizing school facilities to support PGCPS's academic objectives at the district's 165 neighborhood schools. Only 30% of the neighborhood schools currently fall within PGCPS's target utilization range of 80 to 95%. And this initiative will use a variety of strategies to meet the district's objectives, including school construction and expansion, school consolidations, and rezoning. Now we want to take a moment to talk about how the process will unfold. This initiative has several key components. First, starting last school year, we conducted a comprehensive analysis of the district, including boundaries, feeder patterns, and program locations. Following an initial round of community meetings, we drafted 3 scenarios with community input, and we're currently in the second round of community meetings. We'll use the feedback from these scenarios and other engagement efforts to select and refine one boundary scenario. And finally, the proposed boundary adjustments will be presented to the Board of Education for approval. So back in January of 2021, we held a series of 5 community meetings where we introduced the planning process and collected community feedback. We then developed 3 draft scenarios based on our own analysis, district priorities, and the community feedback. And in the spring, we released the draft scenarios report. We launched a community survey, an online boundary tool explorer, which allows you to see how the draft scenarios would impact you directly, which we'll talk about more later tonight. And we're currently in the second round of community meetings, or phase 2 engagement. And during this phase, we'll be focusing more on the draft scenarios and collecting additional community feedback. Following this round of engagement, we'll select and refine one scenario, incorporating both district and community priorities, and then begin the boundary change approval process. We are targeting final approval of the new boundaries by the end of April 2022, and new boundaries will go into effect for school year 23-24. There have been and will continue to be multiple ways for the public to engage throughout this process. These include community meetings like these, the project website, and digital engagement such as a survey and online comment form. And we'll collect public feedback on the draft scenarios until December 10th. So far, over 1,100 PGCPS community members participated in the first round of engagement, and nearly half of those participants were parents of current PGCPS students. The top themes which emerged from those community meetings included the impacts of overutilization, aging school facilities, and access to special programs. Since the release of the draft scenarios report, an online tool in May, we've received over 1,700 survey responses on the draft scenarios. So this initiative will culminate with the formal boundary change approval process, and we want to take a moment to expand on what that process looks like. So first, the Boundary Advisory Committee, which is a group of PGCPS leaders who advise on boundary changes, will convene to refine and finalize a boundary scenario and offer it to the CEO for her consideration. Upon approval, the CEO presents the final boundary scenario to the Board of Education. The BOE then holds public hearings on the proposed changes, and finally the board takes a vote to approve the final boundaries. So to recap, through this initiative, we've conducted a comprehensive analysis of boundaries, feeder patterns, and program locations. After we select and refine a draft scenario with community input, the proposed boundary adjustments will be presented to the BOE for approval. And the public has been invited to participate through public meetings, the project website, a survey, and an online tool. And these public meetings are the last opportunity for public input before a final boundary proposal is developed and presented to the BOE. So now we'd like to take a deeper dive into the boundary scenarios, but we're going to pause for another polling question. So I'm going to hand it back over to Steve.
Great, thank you, Chris. Yeah, so we have one question this time around, which should be coming up on your screen now. And it's just to get a better sense of whether you've participated in the previous parts of this initiative, and if so, how. So if it is in more than one of these choices, you can click on any of the ones that you participated in. Appreciate everyone answering so quickly. We're already up to 50% of the folks in the room. And if you had not noticed, we actually have well over 400 people in the room tonight, which is a great turnout. Great to see folks from across the county participating tonight. And this is the first of 5 meetings that will be happening starting tonight. So I'm now up to about 70% of you have taken the poll. going to give you about 15 seconds more. So if you're in listening range and you want to make sure that your voice is heard and let us know how you've participated, now's the time to do it. Again, how have you engaged with this process so far? And there are multiple options. I'm now up to more than 300 people who've answered. I'm going to give you 5 more seconds. Counting down 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. People are putting in their final votes. I'm going to end the poll and share the results. And so it's a nice range here. So we have a lot of newcomers, which is great. 57% didn't participate at all out of the more than 1,100 who participated the first time around, at least in the community meetings, and more through online activities. And we had 18% participated in a meeting, 27% read, 17% used the tool. So you'll have a chance to briefly use it tonight and get the link to that. 23% completed the online survey, but really glad we have a lot of newcomers. Really important as this process moves forward closer to a decision that we have more residents and parents in the county weighing in. So I'm going to stop sharing. You will probably need to close that part of the screen as we move on so it's not blocking your view. And I'm going to turn it back to Chris as Chris begins to talk about the 3 scenarios. Chris?
Great, thanks so much, Steve. So to get going, we're just going to start with, what is a scenario? A scenario is a map of possible school boundaries. And to develop scenarios, we utilize computational modeling, or a set of mathematical operations, to transform input data into something new. So our models produce thousands of outcomes, and we utilize the model's best outcomes to create a new map of possible boundaries. There are several factors or considerations we want you to keep in mind as you think through the scenarios. The district has to weigh several considerations when developing boundaries, and these factors are interrelated and each one impacts the other. So they include capacity and utilization, which is the ratio of students at a school compared to the total number of student stations. Distance to school, so PGCPS strives for students to attend a school as close to home as possible and to walk to school whenever possible. So when adjusting school boundaries, it's important to consider the impacts on how far students will travel to the neighborhood school. Assignment stability, which refers to changes to school assignment or the number of students rezoned. The district considers how often these changes are made and how many students are impacted. Facility age and condition, including which schools are in need of repair or renovation and which schools might be considered for consolidation. And we're going to take a closer look at each of these factors across the 3 scenarios in just a few moments. So incorporating our data analysis, district priorities, and community input, we developed 3 draft scenarios. So scenario 1 addresses the most severe instances of over and underutilization and rezones the smallest number of students. Scenario 2 seeks to address utilization as widely as possible through the district. This scenario reduces the number of temporary classrooms in use and consolidates some elementary schools as needed, really focusing on prioritizing utilization. And scenario 3 focuses on ensuring as many students as possible attend school in the newest or most updated facilities and removes the need for temp classrooms or trailers, aside from those classified as being in good condition. So there are some updates that are consistent across all 3 scenarios. I want to take a moment to talk through those. So all 3 include planned school openings and expansions, already planned consolidations, and as we discussed earlier, grade band realignment, or shifting all 6th graders to middle schools. So you'll see all the changes listed here incorporated into all 3 scenarios. So the maps on this page show the average number assignment changes by elementary attendance areas for each scenario. And this map really allows us to see how assignment changes are distributed across the county and where they're concentrated. So overall, we can see more assignment changes near planned expansions or new schools construction, as well in North County, where we have a higher concentration of overutilized schools and new school buildings coming online. So quickly, just to recap, in summary, we can expect to see more boundary changes where new school construction is planned. And in particular, we can expect to see more boundary changes in North County where overutilization is greatest. So now we're going to take a look at each scenario through 4 key factors, starting with utilization. So as I mentioned earlier, PGCPS aims for all schools to have a utilization rate between 85 and 100%. So currently 50 neighborhood schools are in the target utilization range. In scenario one, the number of schools in the target range decreases slightly, but the number of extremely over and underutilized schools decreases, and we'll talk about that more on the next slide. In scenario two, the number of schools in the target range increases by 23 to 73 schools in total. In scenario three, the number of schools in the target range increases by 7 to 57 in total. On this slide, we compare the number of very over or underutilized schools. And very overutilized schools are those over 120% utilized, and very underutilized schools are those utilized below 60%. Right now, there are 13 very over or underutilized schools. And in scenario one, the number of very over or underutilized schools decreases to 5. In scenario two, it decreases to 4. And in scenario three, that number decreases to 11. Now we're going to take a moment to discuss assignment stability, or the total number of students rezoned in each scenario. So the 3 draft scenarios rezone between 11% and 14% of the total number of PGCPS students. So scenario 1 rezones the fewest number of students, 11%, or roughly 11,000 students. Scenario 2 rezones the greatest number of students at 14%, or nearly 14,000 students. And scenario 3 rezones 12%, or around 11,300 students. It's important to note that in each of the scenarios, 4% of those total rezoned students represent students who are attending a newly constructed school. In order to optimize utilization across the district, we also considered school consolidations as a part of each scenario. We know school consolidations can have a major impact on communities and thus should be carefully considered. And so to identify possible school consolidations, we developed a list of criteria to evaluate schools. So to be considered for consolidations, schools must be underutilized. They must be KIPP cycle 3 or less, meaning that there are higher priorities for repair or renovation. And also schools with a higher percentage of students living within their walk zones were not included. We also layered on additional criteria for each scenario, including distance from the nearest school, school size and capacity, as well as projected enrollment decline. In scenario 1, only previously planned consolidations were included, so 3 in total. In scenario 2, 7 consolidations were identified, 7 schools were identified for consolidation, excuse me. In scenario 3, which focused on moving students into newer facilities, 10 schools were identified for consolidation. And if you want a more detailed explanation of the criteria developed for consolidations, please see the full draft scenarios report, which outlined in full detail. So next up is distance to school. Distance to school varies widely across PGCPS. However, most students attending their neighborhood school travel relatively short distances, and average distances to school remain similar to current averages in all 3 scenarios. It's important to note that boundary changes can often result in shifts in travel distance, so we were excited to see that there's relatively little change across all 3 scenarios. In all 3 scenarios, we also preserve walk zones throughout the district. So walk zones are an area in which students are considered to have a safe and reasonable walk to school, and PGCPS tries to keep as many students in the walk zone as possible. The scenarios had basically no impact on walk zones apart from slight changes due to moving 6th graders to middle schools. And lastly, facility conditions. We'll start by looking at the total number, the number of temporary classrooms needed in each scenario. It's important to note that all 3 scenarios reduce the number of temps needed overall. Currently, the district has 397 temps or trailers in use. And scenario 1 reduces the number of temp classrooms needed to 202. Scenarios 2 and 3 specifically focus on removing temps in poor condition. And scenario 2 reduces the number of temp classrooms needed to 252. And scenario 3 reduces the number of temporary classrooms needed by the greatest degree down to 146. Now onto facility age and condition. So PGCPS assigns every school a KIPP cycle, which is a rating that categorizes school facilities in terms of level of priority for renovation or replacement. So KIPP cycle 3 and 4 schools are those in the best rated condition. So all three scenarios slightly increase the share of students attending schools in the best rated condition, but only slightly. Currently, there are 53% of students are in KIPP cycle 3 or 4 schools. In scenario 4, 56% of students are in KIPP cycle 3 or 4 schools, and in scenario 2, 55%, and in scenario 3, 56%. There are a couple of important reasons why we don't see more dramatic changes in the share of students attending KIPP cycle 3 and 4 schools. One is because we strive to keep the number of students rezoned relatively low, no more than 14% in total. We don't see a dramatic shift. Rezoning a larger share of students overall could have produced a more dramatic change. And in addition to prioritizing students in newer facilities, the model still really sought to address utilization as best as possible, which was another limitation. So each of these factors is interrelated and carries important considerations for the experiences of students in PGCPS. For example, improving utilization can improve student experience by having more optimally utilized classrooms and course spaces, and can address operational challenges, including budgetary concerns. But improving utilization also requires rezoning a larger share of PGCPS students and has a greater impact on assignment stability. Changes to students' school assignments can have impacts on travel distance and walk zones, although the impacts are quite minimal in our models, which is great. And prioritizing students in newer school facilities and planning for the new schools expected in the coming years also requires rezoning students and may require school consolidations. And we really want to encourage you to think about which factor or factors are most important for the board to consider as we move forward. So we know that we just shared a ton of data, and just as a reminder, all of the information we shared today has been available in the draft scenarios report and the report summary. And additionally, we'll be posting this presentation to the project website tomorrow. And now we're going to pause for a bit of Q&A.
Great, thanks, Chris. And yes, Rihanna, welcome back. I think we also will have questions for a couple other PGCPS staff and WXY staff, Raf and John. So if you could both come on screen as well, that would be great. So let me go through. We got a bunch of questions. We're only going to be able to answer so many. I know also that the team has been answering some of the questions through chat that gets chatted out to everyone, and we'll continue to do that. And we'll answer as many as we can in both modes. So the first question actually, Rihanna, is for you. It's what will happen to students who are currently enrolled in a school but then get redistricted to a new school? Will they be grandfathered in and stay in their old school?
Thanks, Steve. That's a really important question. So grandfathering is something that we will, take a look at and analyze once a final scenario has been selected. But ultimately, decisions around grandfathering are under the purview of the Board of Education, as they're responsible for adopting comprehensive boundaries, which is why this whole process is going to culminate in a board vote. One thing to think about is that there can be significant impacts to transportation depending on the number of students who are grandfathered. And given the challenges of our district, every single district across the nation around bus drivers, that might be something that's part of that decision. I will say that it's a general policy of the district to not for children that are in their terminal grade at their school. So if you are in 5th grade at elementary or 8th grade in middle school or in 12th grade, those students are generally not required to change schools, even if there are boundary changes.
Great, Rihanna. And then a quick follow-up. If a student is grandfathered in, will a younger sibling have to attend the new school or the new boundary school. I'm sorry, or stay with the sibling. So I don't, you may have
So,
in some ways answered that already, but.
yep. So when it comes to siblings, we don't have a specific policy as it relates to comprehensive schools that allows siblings to tag along with their older siblings. But ultimately that will, depend on the board and, decisions that they take there. But again, every increase in the amount of grandfathering is going to be an increased burden on transportation. So that's just something to watch out for, as we're going through this process and decisions are made around that.
Great, thanks. And before I ask the next question, I saw a few hands were raised. We're not going to be able to accommodate raised hands. So if you do have a question, please submit it to ask me questions in the chat. To that, pull down the menu and click on ask me questions and ask your question that way. We're going to do as many as we can, both orally and by chat, and we'll see how many we can get to. This next one is for Chris. It's a simple, straightforward one. Are you going to share the results of the online polling about the different scenarios?
Yes, great question. We'll be sharing both the polling from the community meetings as well as the results of the online survey publicly. That'll be posted to the project website once it is closed.
Right. And I'm wondering whether one of our team can put in the chat the link to the boundary site. It may have been put in earlier, maybe not everyone saw it. And also if there's a somewhat separate link, a link to the interim report, because we've referenced it a couple of times. People may want to take a look at it afterwards. John Wooden from the school system. Welcome, John. So next question is, when will the boundary changes go into effect? I can't hear you, so I don't know if you're on mute, John, or. I'm still not hearing you. Oh, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can now. Yep.
Yeah, so it appears that the boundary changes will go into effect to the September, the 23-24 school year.
Great. Yeah, so it's not this coming school year. It's 2 years from this past September. Great, thank you. Next question. And I think this is for you, Chris. Are some parts of the county going to see more change than others? And I know that was addressed during the presentation, but worth reiterating.
Yeah, no, definitely worth reiterating. As we showed in the presentation, North County, we see a higher concentration of overutilized schools. We also see more planned facilities coming online. And so because of the combination of those factors, we're gonna see and anticipate more changes to boundaries, both in North County and within the Beltway in particular.
Great. All right, Raph, we've got one for you. It's a little more technical. It says, can you explain how the modeling works and what are the benefits of using this kind of process to make scenarios? And then I'll have a follow-up that has to do with distance.
Great. Yeah, thank you for this question. It's a really good one. So I won't go into a terrible amount of depth, but at a high level, the model that we're working with starts with PGCPS's current boundaries, and then in a step-by-step manner is going to make small adjustments to the boundaries. So if we had an overutilized school, it might look at that overutilized school and say, what's a small change I can make to this boundary along its border that'll make it less overutilized? And so it proceeds in a step-by-step way until it's resolved some of those utilization challenges. This process is not just done once, but we repeat it tens of thousands of times, making small differences in how we make those steps. The advantage of this process is that after we've run these tens of thousands of model runs, we are able to parse certain directions in the boundaries that are good from the bad, and ultimately achieve better outcomes to utilization, facility conditions, distance to school while minimizing impacts to assignments.
Great, thanks, Raf. And tough to explain that in lay language, but I understood that, so I appreciate it. Hopefully that was accessible for everybody. A follow-up is someone asks, why does distance to school stay the same or not improve very much across these scenarios?
Yeah, thanks, Steve. So the most important reason that distance to school stays similar is because of the grade band realignment. So middle school boundaries tend to be larger. There are fewer middle schools in the district than there are elementary schools. And so by moving many current sixth graders from elementary schools to grade schools, which by the way has many instructional benefits, brings up the distance to school. So actually that we didn't see large increases to distance to school while making that grade band alignment, we consider to be a success. Finally, all three of the models took utilization as their chief concern and dealt with the other key lenses afterwards. And so you might have a scenario where an overutilized school will give a piece of its boundary to an adjacent school, and that change might increase distances slightly, but have a much more positive utilization benefit. So we assess these trade-offs in the aggregate for all of the scenarios, but there are instances where that sort of thing can happen.
Great, thanks, Raf. And kind of a follow-up, but this one for Rihanna, because it links to the sixth grade and middle school moves. So it says, when will moving all sixth graders to middle school occur? My children's elementary school goes up to sixth grade and I prefer it to stay that way.
Great question. So the initiative to align sixth grade students to middle schools really began over a decade ago. And we've slowly been making progress to the point where now the majority of elementary schools no longer serve the sixth grade. And the majority of our sixth graders do attend middle schools or K-8 schools. But we ran up against the limitation of middle school seats. And that is part of why the blueprint for schools and the traditional CIP focused on middle schools. And we now have, so in 23-24, we're going to have 8 new and expanded middle school facilities opening. And so that's going to give us enough seats to complete the process. And there's a lot of advantages to that. The main one that prompted the board to adopt this initiative were many national studies that showed that having students in middle school for just 2 years was the least educationally effective grade structure. And that having them for at least in middle school for at least 3 years or in a K-8 school had better outcomes for students. The other thing is we have a lot of students that, move throughout Prince George's County. They, may move from one elementary school boundary to another. And that it creates a challenge when you don't have a unified grade structure across the district, because if I am in 5th grade at a school that's K-5 and I think, oh, I'm going to middle school next year. But if I happen to move into a boundary that's a K-6 school, I now have to go back to elementary school for a year and then go to middle school the next year. So having a unified structure across the district is going to eliminate those cases that we run into every year. Every year we have many parents calling, asking, can I get a special exception to go on to middle school rather than having to do, another year in elementary school. So we won't have that situation anymore.
Great, thanks, Rihanna. Chris, next one for you. Will the final boundaries definitely be one of these three scenarios, or will the next round in this process reflect the input from this current round of engagement and have some new options or slightly different options?
Thank you, Steve. That's a great question. So as a next step, we'll be selecting a final scenario, but we'll be incorporating the community feedback that we've heard through this second round of engagement. So the final scenario or option won't be exactly what you see here, one of these options. It will be refined, it will be updated based on conversations, understanding the district priorities and also community priorities. So there will be another round of refinement sort of based off of all of the things that we've heard through this second phase of engagement.
Great. We have time for a couple more. So the next one, and Chris, I don't know if it's you or Rihanna, it's would specialty schools such as TAG be subject to change as a part of this process?
Rihanna, you want to take that one?
Sure. So our talented and gifted programs are located both at, well, we have two schools that are TAG only programs. That's Glen Arden Woods Elementary and Heather Hills Elementary. But all of our other TAG programs are located at comprehensive schools. So there could be, while there won't be any changes to the TAG programs themselves, one impact that's possible is if you are an in-boundary TAG, if you have an in-boundary TAG student, like let's say, for example, I live in Longfield's elementary school comprehensive boundary. If my child's TAG identified, they can participate in the TAG center program at the school without having to apply to the lottery. But in the future, if you're, let's say you're reboundaried to Samuel Massey, then you would need to apply to the lottery if you wanted to participate in the TAG Center program at Longfields. I will say that we have not been able to fill all of our TAG seats, particularly in the last 2 years with COVID. And so that's, it's possible that you might have to apply to the lottery, but in the last couple of years, we have had sufficient seats to accommodate all the students who wanted to participate in the elementary program.
Great. And I think the next one I think is also for you, Rihanna. With the increased amount of students potentially moving to newer schools, will the county be increasing teachers at those schools to accommodate that influx?
Yes, that's a great question. So schools that get more students will get more funding and they will get more teachers and more staff. So our the district uses a program that's called student-based budgeting. And so the funding sort of follows the children. So wherever your child goes, the funding that's associated with them will move with them to their new location, and that will enable schools that are expanded to hire more teachers and more staff.
Great. Then one last question, and then we're going to move to the breakouts in the interest of time. It's what happens to the school buildings that get closed? Will they be torn down? Are they left abandoned? Do they still receive maintenance? What happens with them?
That's a great question. It's one that we always have anytime that we've had consolidations or closures. And the district actually has a policy and procedure around how to handle buildings that are no longer used as schools. And we can share what that is in the chat, the link to that. But essentially, what it says is that the district will form a group a facility group to look at how to use those buildings. And you know, in recent years, we've had schools that have been consolidated, repurposed into other things. For example, Kenmore Elementary School was repurposed as an early childhood center, so that could happen, or it could be converted for a specialty program. We've had other facilities that have been used as swing space. So, you know, it's possible that we could use a facility for when we're renovating another facility. We can house students there temporarily while their building's under construction, you know, and then they'll move back. So that's another possibility. If the building were in very poor condition, it's possible that it, you know, it could be demolished and the property could be turned into a park. That's another thing that we've explored in the past. So there's a lot of possibilities. But yes, there'll be a group that includes school system folks, county folks, community folks to figure out, you know, how to use buildings if any of them are consolidated.
Great, thanks, Brianna. I just want to acknowledge that there were a lot of questions that had to deal with or dealt with specific schools or specific changes to boundaries, which is really hard to address in a meeting like this where we're looking across the whole thing. Rihanna, if folks have specific concerns, do they just send an email to the school boundary office?
Yep.
Is that the best way to handle that?
Yep, there's a couple things they can do. First, I would encourage folks to complete the online survey that's on the project web, linked on the project web page. And in that survey, you can actually select specific schools that you want to tell us about and you want to give us feedback about. And the reason we're going to ask folks to start there is that that information is going to be summarized, analyzed to, as Chris mentioned, to help us to refine a final proposal. So it's helpful if we can say, you know, we got 50 messages about New Glenridge Middle School, and this was the direction, this was the, you know, the feedback that we were getting. So it's sort of an economy of scale of comments. So that's helpful. The other thing is, if you have a specific concern, question, you can always send an email to school.boundaries. We'll put that in the chat. I think we have in the chat, school.boundaries@pgcps.org. And a staff member will, you know, respond to you. Or if you just want to, you know, make a statement, you can do that too. And we're cataloging all of those and compiling those, again, to help us as we refine into a final proposal.
Great, thanks, Rihanna. That's really important because we know we have you know, a lot of folks registering their concerns and we can't address them all here. So thank you for that. All right, so Chris, it's going to be back to you. And for those who have not checked out the boundary tool, now is going to be your opportunity to do that and see how the 3 scenarios might impact your neighborhood or where you live. So Chris, back to you.
Great, thank you so much, Steve. That's exactly right. We're going to ask everyone to use the online tool to see how each scenario impacts you based on your home address. And I think we're going to drop the link into the chat, and I'm also going to demonstrate how to use the tool right now. So first, you're going to want to go to the website. We've got a lot of intro information here, just how to engage and how to use the website, some instructions. And you scroll down into the search bar and you input your home address. I'm going to insert an example here, 4200 Guilford Drive. Oops.
And for folks who may not have seen, the tool website is now in the chat.
Great. All right, so you input your address. The tool will actually take you to that address. And the online tool, so it'll pull up the existing school assignments by each grade level. So here, existing, elementary, middle, and high. And then it also shows the assignments for each scenario 1, 2, and 3. So in this example, we see there are no changes in scenario 1 here in green. In scenario 2, the ES and MS assignments change. So Paint Branch Elementary to University Park Elementary, and Greenbelt Middle to Hyattsville Middle. And in scenario 3, the middle school and high school assignments change. So Greenbelt Middle to Buck Lodge Middle, and Northwestern High to Parkdale High. So we encourage you to go to the website, put in your address, take a look at how the draft scenarios would impact you directly. And we're going to give you a moment to do that. And Steve, I'm going to have you lead us through another poll in response to this.
All right, so hopefully people have had a chance to take a look at how the scenarios impact you. I am going to bring up the poll. Hopefully folks are ready. There's this time there are 3 questions, and I'm going to launch it now. We'll give you some time to answer it. So the first question, were you able to find your home address? So that's pretty basic. Hopefully everyone who tried was able to. And as you're kind of using the tool just preliminarily, if you can let us know, well, so is your address impacted by one of the scenarios or multiple scenarios? So pick the choice that applies to you. Could be all of them, could also be none of them. So, and that a lot of that will be determined on your location in the county, because as Chris shared earlier, if you're inside the Beltway, more likely to be impacted. If you're in your kind of central, north central and north in the county, more likely to be impacted. So what did you find out about your address and the how it intersects with the 3 scenarios? And then the third question is kind of asking for your own analysis. So if there are boundary changes recommended for your neighborhood school, whether it's 1 scenario, 2, or all 3, what would you guess are the reasons for that? And so there's a bunch of different options. You can answer more than one, but it's because a new school or an addition is being built. It's to deal with overutilization or underutilization. It's because schools are getting consolidated, but it also could be that you're not sure. Or that you don't think it's any of the above reasons, it's something else. And that would be really helpful to know. So we had 240 people answer. That's great. 95% of you were able to access. The 5% were not. That could be because you're just calling in by phone. Hopefully you didn't have any technical difficulties. In terms of how your home address intersects with the scenarios, 20% of you, that was the highest answer, actually none of the scenarios for 40% of you. For 20% of you, all of the scenarios, and then the rest is kind of in between. Scenario 1 has the most of the single scenarios, 12%, scenario 2, 9%, scenario 3%, 7%, and then kind of a mix where smaller percentages were impacted by 2 of the 3. So that's really helpful for us to know. And then the final question was, what do you think the reason is for those who did get impacted? The most common answer was other or none of the above. So it would be helpful to know what that is. Maybe you can place that in chat real quick. 33% alleviating overcrowding, which we saw in Chris's presentation. That's a pretty big problem in more than 50 schools, maybe 60 schools. 27% not sure of the reason. 10% underutilization, which we also saw in the presentation, is a pretty big issue in the school system as well. So again, thank you for sharing your perspective on why the impact might be in terms of where your address is located. All right, so this is the 3rd of 5 meetings that we're doing in this phase. So we're a little bit more than halfway through. If you know folks who really should be attending these meetings, would encourage you to have them attend tomorrow night, which will be all in Spanish, and or attend on Saturday morning from 10:30 to noon, where you'll have the option to participate either in English or Spanish. So those will be the final meetings in this phase. And as Chris said earlier in the evening, we'll be taking comments on the website through December 10th. Phase 2 engagement is coming closer and closer to a close. We're continuing to collect feedback. The survey is still open on the website. I'll give you that site in a moment. Once everything closes up and we can look at all the data to analyze and with all the public's feedback, the consultants will be bringing together a final scenario based on the inputs that will then go through a process with the advisory committee, with the CEO of the schools, with the Board of Education. And then once it's gone through that, then it will go into a public hearing, most likely in March. So right near the end of the winter, early spring. And then soon after that, a final recommendation will be approved by the board. So this will all be happening in the next 5-6 months or so. If you want to continue to learn more or give additional feedback, you can go on to the Boundary website, which is www.pgcps.org/boundary. Or if you want to email someone on the staff directly, you can send that email to school.boundaries@pgcps.org. I think we've done it for tonight. We really appreciate you coming out in large numbers, giving us your honest and frank feedback, fully participating. Again, want to thank facilitators and staff for everything they've done to make for a constructive meeting. Continue to stay involved, and hopefully we'll see you back during the public hearing period. And have a great night, and see you all soon.